Hi guys, it's Caroline, and today I'm going to be giving you 5 recommendations for your non-reader friends. Now, I found that I have a lot of friends that always like to come to me and say, hey, I'm not really into reading. I know it's your thing, but is there a book that you would recommend to me? Now, there's a lot of reasons why people might not be readers. They feel like they don't have the time. Maybe they just don't buy into the idea that it's that fun. They would rather watch TV or a movie. Or they just don't know what is going to interest them, and so it's really daunting. And if you get them really excited about something, they'd be happy to do it, but they just don't know what. So here are 5 books that for various reasons I think are great ones to either gift, it's about that time, or recommend to your friends who aren't the biggest readers but are maybe interested in dabbling and seeing what it's about. So let's get into them. First up is The Nickel Boys. Now, I'm not the first person to recommend this. I'm pretty sure he won the Pulitzer for both this book and The Underground Railroad. But the reason I would recommend this book instead of The Underground Railroad for this specific challenge is The Nickel Boys, for one, is super duper short. And it's very much based on a real life story. It's based on a real school / kind of prison where young kids were sent. And it's based on something that actually existed, and I think it makes you a better person after reading it and sort of being confronted with the horrors of slavery and the Jim Crow South. And I just think it's a really important book to read. So if you have a person who, 1, is scared of a long book, and 2, maybe thinks, oh, what's the point of reading fiction? It's fake, it's not real. This is a really great book to read because it does have so many roots in reality that you just learn a lot, and someone who thinks, oh, fiction's not real, it's not for me, will benefit and kind of understand what fiction can do. Next up is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Now, I think this is a wonderful book. It was one of my favorite reads of this year, particularly because we're in a pandemic. This book is about a pandemic and its aftermath, and I think that it's really humbling and eye-opening, but it has a lot of positivity despite how awful the circumstances are for the main characters in their present timeline. And it gave me a lot of hope for getting through our personal pandemic, because I thought, oh, it's not that bad, and even if it was that bad, there are still people out there who keep the hope going, keep it going, and we're gonna be okay. It's also just beautifully written, and I would highly recommend this to anyone in any scenario, but specifically the pandemic scenario, despite the fact that I worried that I would have a lot of anxiety reading about a pandemic. In a pandemic, it actually made me feel a lot better about our circumstances. Because of that, I think, again, it sort of shows the beauty of fiction and what fiction can teach us in our real lives. I also just think it's a gripping story that almost anyone will have no trouble falling into. Again, it's not super long, and I just ate it up. There's dual timelines, and you sort of unravel things as it goes along. You figure out what's going on with the pandemic, how did that happen, but also the connections of various people. It's interesting, it's entertaining. I think that anyone would be excited to read this, and I would really recommend this to someone who's nervous about reading. Next up is Una Out of Order by Margarita Montemor. Now, I read this and I was actually very pleasantly delighted. It's about a woman who her birthday's on New Year's, and I think it's on her 18th birthday. She passes out, and when she wakes up, she's not the next year. She wakes up in, I forget how old she is. She's 40 or something. And every year on New Year's, she wakes up in a different time. So she's basically living her life out of order. Or the reason I really love this book is, 1, it really focuses on living in the present, making the most of your life. It's more about the journey than the destination, that kind of thing, which I think is an important thing to think about these days when we're sort of all really on a journey and we don't know what the destination is. But also it gives you, it takes you through a lot of different timelines and eras, so you get to experience the teens, you get to experience the early noughts, you get to experience the 90s, and it's just kind of fun to just have it all bouncing around. And so this is for basically any aged reader, because you really get, the perspective of what it's like to be older and growing old, but also the perspective of what it's like to be young. And in fact, when she is young, she's been old before, so she kind of lives life to her fullest. And I think older people can appreciate that, but I think younger people will appreciate the jokes of, this old person showing up in the 2015 or something and not knowing what a cell phone is and being really confused, and can relate to our grandparents. perhaps having those issues themselves. I don't know, it's kind of predictable, and there's nothing crazy going on except for the premise itself, but I think the premise lends itself to being a really exciting and fun book, and I think it's because it's just so fun, and there's so many different eras and ages that it's a perfect book for almost any kind of reader. And yeah, the plot's a little gimmicky, but the gimmick works, and I think that makes it just a fun read. Next up, I'm gonna recommend Wow, No Thank You, or We Are Never Meeting in Real Life. Both are by Samantha Irby. They are a collection of essays by her. Samantha Irby is this hilarious woman, and she just talks about what it's like to be Black, be from the Midwest, be overweight, be unhealthy, you know, whatever. And, you know, she makes fun of herself, but also she just goes into a lot of just weird stereotypes or weird things that she's gone through, and it's so funny. She is hilarious. I listen to them on audiobook and she reads them, and she's the funniest person I think ever. I blew through both of those books back to back. I would highly recommend that. I think it's also good for a non-reader because funny essays are really easy to get into. They're similar to perhaps a podcast or something that you might see on TV, like a Netflix stand-up comedy, but I think they're a little bit more thoughtful than perhaps a stand-up show. But they also are just as entertaining, and so I think it's a really easy way to sell someone who's not a big reader on how reading can actually be really fun, because I found myself laughing out loud constantly, and I think that's one of the misconceptions that a lot of people who don't read have, is like, how can it really be that fun? You know, doesn't it just make you sad because these books are so sad? And it's like, no, some of these books are hilarious. And finally, I'm gonna recommend Queenie by Candace Carty Williams. This is one I've talked about before. It's a contemporary about a Black woman who breaks up with her boyfriend, partially because his family is racist and they have some miscommunications, partially about his family's racism. He says, hey, let's go on a break, which he really means is we're done, but letting her down gently. She takes it very literally. It's months later and she's still working on how to better herself and how to make it so when they get back together, it goes flawlessly, you know, wondering when he is going to come back. And it's a lot about mental health, about being like female sexuality, about friendship, about relationships. I think it's really funny and beautiful. It also talks about being a part of an immigrant family in the UK and sort of the things that come along with that, along with just being a young woman in the world, trying to figure out your career while also trying to figure out your romantic life. I really think it is the fluffy contemporary while also having some hard-hitting moments and some hard-hitting topics that make it really relevant. And for someone who's worried about, oh, I don't know if I'm a big reader, I think it's perfect because it does feel a little bit like a movie you might just sit down and watch, but also you don't walk away saying, I got nothing from this book, why the heck did you make me read it? It really brings something to the table. So there are 5 books that I recommend either recommending to your non-reader friends or maybe even spreading the holiday joy and gifting to your non-reader friends this year. But yeah, that's it for this video. Bye!